inspiration for 65 years. We're Gospel 1590 KPRT.
It's beautiful. The facts are indisputable. Black is beautiful. Brand new day. Back to business as usual. See, we built empires and engineers and scientists. Gave a glimpse into the past through Egyptian hieroglyphs. Black is beautiful.
This is The Real Deal with Emil, brought to you by MHG, your local year-round trusted insurance partner. Let MHG help you for free. What's going on, Kansas City? You are listening to The Real Deal with Emil, and I am your host, Emil Cleaver. This show is co-produced by Phillips West Public Relations and Communications and sponsored by MHG, your trusted local insurance partner. There was a new report released, and this report says that the health insurance marketplace, it finds that with applicable tax credits, more than 7 in 10 current marketplace enrollees could find plans for $75 a month in premiums or less, and almost 8 in 10 could find plans for $100 a month in premiums or less. If you don't enroll in a 2016 health insurance plan by January 31st, 2016, you can't enroll in a health insurance plan for 2016 unless you qualify for a special enrollment period. So give MHG a call, 816-399-4040, or come by their enrollment center located at the corner of 18th and Vine and speak with a licensed agent who can help you make an informed and confident decision about your health care coverage. Now, with that being said, I want to thank my special guest, Missouri State Representative Brandon Ellington. Welcome to the show.
How you doing today?
I'm doing good. Now, I want to get right into it. First of all, could you describe or tell us what the boundaries are of your district? A lot of people get confused about state rep boundaries.
Okay, my state district goes from Truce all the way over to Sterling Road in Independence, Missouri, roughly 47th Street down to Trimmer Road. But I'm also the chair of the Missouri Legislative Black Caucus, so my duties actually go outside of my elected house district. So I'm actually moving around the entire state of Missouri.
Okay, I want to ask you about that Black Caucus a little later. So you represent mainly an African American district?
Yeah.
Okay. So is there any new legislative ideas or anything that you're working on that would help move forward the black community or help minority businesses?
Oh man, almost my entire legislative agenda does that. Basically, what I try to work on is breaking down institutional barriers, pretty much deconstructing institutions as they currently exist. So I have a bill that will certify and bond inmates. I have got this bill all the way to the governor's desk. Has not got signed into law yet, but what this would do is it allow people that have felonies and records to actually reassimilate into society by virtue of when they get locked up, they actually get certified in whatever job that they're doing. That way it's not free slavery. And this is one of the things that I mean by deconstructing the institution. In the African American or the black community, we always talk about the penitentiaries as modern day plantations, but we haven't done anything to change the implementation of that plantation to actually benefit those that are getting locked up, as opposed to them just working for free. I also have a small business loan that I've been trying to pass, which would allow small businesses to generate the same tax credits that large companies and corporations get. I mean, I have a lineage of bills, expungement, and the whole nine.
Right. Now, you brought up something, and I saw some videos that you did. It was called Covert Racism and Political and Institutional Barriers. Can you tell me what that's about a little bit?
Yeah, that's actually one of the new paths I'm actually using, the platform that I've been blessed to be in. Is to actually open up people's eyes and expose mainstream society to how they benefit off of institutions that was specifically created for isolation and oppression. And so when you talk about laws that actually will benefit so-called minorities, in order to do that, we have to deconstruct some of the laws that restrict so-called minorities from advancement. We can look at the educational arena. We can look at like economic opportunities in isolated income areas. All of this goes to assimilation and advancement, in particular when we talk about so-called minorities.
So how can black people get past this? I mean, there's such a deep rooted system of racism. I mean, what is there that can be done from your eyes?
That's the easiest one. When we talk about racism, we're talking about a majority group, or what we consider the majorities group, instituting isolational practices. The problem with that is the system is designed by institutions. A system does not operate individual institutions, and institutions are directly controlled by policies and procedures. So once we start deconstructing the policies and changing the procedures of the institutions, and the system ultimately has to change. And until you deconstruct the institutions, you cannot change the system. Because, and I'll give you an example. You can have a liberal defense attorney that says, I support all so-called minority causes. I don't perpetuate racism, yet the occupation that I do directly benefits off a criminal justice system that I know is unbiased. And if I don't do anything to change that institution and I just benefit monetarily, then I'm subconsciously benefiting off of oppression. I'm subconsciously benefiting off of a institution that I know is designed for imbalance. And you can see that through our drug laws and our sentencing time frames, etc.
Right. And there's a lot of people that say, whites that say, I didn't have anything to do with slavery, and which my response is usually no, but you are benefiting from it.
Yeah.
Now you mentioned something about the prison law. Have you ever heard or read of a book called The New Jim Crow?
Yeah.
Okay. So there seems to be a system from the schools to the prisons, and I recently read something that by third grade, if you're not meeting these standards, pretty much they're getting your bed ready in a prison.
Yeah.
What kind of laws or what kind of action can we take to stop that? I mean, I know the laws to arrest blacks are severely unfair.
Nah, man, I'm loving you. All right, well, let's look at what you just said. If it's data that shows that they're compiling and they're building penitentiary cells off of third grade test scores, yet we allow our kids to continue to go to public schools that has no change in this rubric, then we're falling for the setup. You mentioned the new Jim Crow. Well, we can go back to what we call the Willie Lynch law. And it's utterly ridiculous to me when we talk about documents that dictate human activity, and then we don't break that cycle, and then we blame the doctrine for what happens to us. And it's the same when we talk about our public school systems. The majority of public school residents have a corrupt, deficient curriculum, and we allow our kids to continue to go to these public schools, even though we know these public schools have not invested in our children the way that we feel, and particularly the way that I feel they should have been investing in them. But we fight for the same mantra. Why? Why don't we fight for a different paradigm when we talk about education and making sure that we can control our schools? Because again, we're talking about policies and procedures. So when we talk about the way the school district is set, that's not set in concrete. That can't be changed. When we talk about the way curriculum is administrated, that can be changed. When we talk about neighborhood schools and community cohesiveness, that can be changed. But we allow DESE and other entities to dictate how the schools is ran when it's funded off of taxpayer dollars. And it is perpetuated by non-involvement. So when we talk about breaking the isolation of educational attainment in inner city schools, that's something that it falls on the shoulders of the parents 100%. So if you got it, like my kids go to public school, I'm unhappy with everything the public schools do right now. So not only am I in conversations with the superintendent, I'm also rallying and looking for people to get on the school board, etc., that can control the decision-making process of the implementation of the education. But until the so-called minority in America understand self-determination and understand that we have to control our own institution, and that doesn't make you an isolist. That just makes you somebody that wants to guarantee what your dollars is being spent on. And I can go deeper.
Yeah, I mean that's pretty deep right there. So I mean, you mentioned some things about changing the policies in the school or because we pay for these schools. What is your thought on alternative schools or the I forget
Charter schools.
Charter schools.
I'm actually open to charter schools, but I'm unopen to the application right now. Under Missouri law, charter schools don't have the same evaluation process as a public school has. And charter schools also have the ability to publicly discriminate against children that want to go to their schools. But let's look at the independent charter school model in changing the model of how the school district is ran right now, because I believe charter schools have the ability to do different type of education depending on the mission of that charter school. Well, we can do this same thing when we talk about signature schools with public school dollars. So we can actually make public schools resemble the models that we see beneficial in private schools and isolate the discrimination model. But we don't talk about that. We talk about, well, charter schools is going to take away resources from public schools, but we don't talk about the good things that charter schools do and the negative things that public schools do, and also the virtues of public schools by having a free institution that can't discriminate against any child that goes to it. But using that same hybrid model, if we look at ACE, the African Center School, I think ACE is extremely valuable because it teaches children of African lineage, which gives you a self identity. Well, we can do this same thing with public schools. We've seen it with foreign language and other schools.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's interesting. I guess my biggest concern with education, there are a lot, but I just feel like what they're teaching inner city black kids is not getting them ready for the real world. It's the book, The Miseducation of the Negro.
Yeah.
It's really indoctrinating them, getting them ready for assimilation instead of specifically getting them ready to deal with their community.
But you just hit it on the head. That's all education is, indoctrinationship. So if you go to UMKC and I go to Mizzou, it doesn't mean that I have a better law degree. I'm respected off the indoctrination or the perception of the institution that I go to. So when we talk about public education in America, yes, it's indoctrinationship, and we have to understand the rules of engagement. This is a capitalist society, which means somebody has to be doing better than somebody else. So if you're in a situation in which you're not controlling your educational arenas, then somebody's going to be doing better than you, and more often than not, it's going to be the person outside of that district. Example, I'm one of the only elected officials that kids go to public schools. So I got in a debate with one of my colleagues who sends their kids to private schools. And the debate was, why am I open to changing the model? And my answer was, why are you telling me I should send my kids someplace that you're unwilling to send your child? So I agree with you 100% when we talk about the miseducation, but that's the policies that is current. And those policies don't have to be current. And that's why I use ACE. ACE is a signature school which has a different curriculum than American history. And I believe that the so-called minority has to influence world history. But that goes against some of the historical principles that have been given in America, because there's a difference between American history and world history, and they move simultaneously.
Now, I want to switch it up a little bit to black businesses and the lack of black businesses in our community. What can be done to help businesses that already exist and then encourage more businesses? We have enough soul food restaurants and things like that, and I'm not knocking them. They're all good, but construction companies, things like that. What can we do to build black businesses?
I think this is actually a harder one than it's a superficial answer, because when we talk about black businesses, now we're talking about culturalistic identification and culturalistic support. So when we look at the Latino community, we see that the Latino community is willing to spend dollars within their community and not worry about having the ability to be invited to another community, or not worrying about having other entities come in their community to make them feel like they're part of the same process. And we have to do the same. It was a word that used to be thrown around during the second Reconstruction, which was nationalist. Now, it's a difference between being a nationalist and being a racist. It's a difference between being being ethnic in your spending and just spending your money outside of the community. And we see other communities have that ability to have self-determination and self-confidence. But this comes from our educational arena. So when you have an educational arena that's not teaching you the values of your culture, when you have an educational arena that's not teaching you the value of yourself or your placement in the world, then you tend to identify with other cultures. You tend to seek recognition, and you seem to seek validation from other communities. And I think that's one of the major issues when we talk about the lack of black businesses in the black community, and in particularly the lack of black ownership. If you look at the east side of Kansas City and the west side of Kansas City, you see very little differences in housing stock in businesses, but you see a different attainment in when I made it. Well, I made it if I could put my business on Main, but if I got my business on Prospect, I got to move. But that's a culturalistic identification. I think Malcolm said it the best. As long as we hate the roots of the tree will never flourish. And that's why I think, and to encourage black businesses, we have to start encouraging black education, and that goes into world history.
Yeah, I agree with the education. I had a guest on, and I think I may have even heard you talking about it, that we buy into the branding.
Yes.
I mean, it's just all that name, whatever that name is, we buy into that. So it's hard for black businesses to even establish that name against these big corporations. So that's one of the reasons that one of the reasons, and then it's all indoctrination.
And if I could I throw this in? On the way out here, I'm driving past several bus stops, and I challenge anybody that's out today, look at the bus stops and watch the natural separation. I was on 59th and Truce, and I seen about 4 or 5 black people sitting in the huddle, and then I seen about 10 white folks sitting in the huddle. Now, this is natural separation that we do. Mm-hmm. So when we talk about natural separation that we do, and I don't believe in racism, I think racism is a social construct. However, I think that social construct has realistic effects because we buy into it. But in saying that, if you look at the separation that we have, and you look at the buy-in-ship, so I need to get a job here, I need to do this, this, and that. The only way, and America tells you this, and you hit it when you was talking about the new Jim Crow. America tells you that the only way that you're going to be affluent is to own your own. The only way that you can be rich is to own your own business, own your own company, own your own corporation. But we seek validation in jobs from other people as opposed to creating our own industries. Mm-hmm. And this hurts us. And it's not that we're unintelligent. And some of this goes to the lack of extracurriculum activities that we have when we have youth growing up too.
Yeah, and that brings up, just the Royals. They had watch parties everywhere, but there were no big watch parties down on 18th and Vine. They were out in that other place that I don't want to name off Grand that I can't stand. And then you see the news cameras go there, and then you see like a patch of black people here, a patch of black people there, but the majority were white. And we don't. I think we're so willing to want to be a part of that mainstream society that we don't even realize, what we have ourselves. For those of you who are just tuning in, I am talking to Missouri State Representative Brandon Ellington. If you have a question or comment, you can call in 816-576-7400. That's 816-576-7400. Now, you mentioned earlier that you were the chairman or president of the State Black Caucus. What are some of the things that you all are working on?
Oh, we've actually become more aggressive. And again, it's all praise and honor and glory to God. But basically, one of the biggest issues that we're doing is criminal justice deconstruction. So the year before Mike Brown got shot, I had a bill for video and audio equipment. Had marginal support from Republicans. The next year, when Mike Brown got killed, there was several bills that was filed, no movement at all. So when we talk about issues that has been hampering so-called minorities, we see that these issues have been historic and systemic, generational. And in our opinion, not only do we have to bring as much attention to it that we can, but we have to make people extremely uncomfortable. So when we talk about education is actually a different venue in which we're endeavoring in. The last couple of years, The education bills have mostly been Republicans sponsored with opposition from the Black Caucus, and now the Black Caucus is actually presenting our own educational models. The same when we talk about economic density. Economic density has not been occurring in St. Louis inner cities and definitely not in Kansas City inner cities. Now, some of this is overlapped with lack of activity from the aldermen in St. Louis and the lack of activity from the city council here in Kansas City. But ultimately, at the state, what we're looking at is more businesses. One of the things that we've been able to do this year through the Black Caucus is put pressure on the governor to actually put teeth into the disparity study. Disparity study, in my opinion, has been something that's been superficial because it comes out and it talks about the issues, but it had no implementation mandates in there at all. So this year, the governor actually came out and he implemented it via the disparity study that the Office of Administration will have to actively seek out so-called minorities, will have to create a database for so-called minorities, and all of this goes to increasing so-called minorities positioning and getting contracts, getting businesses jobs. We're also working with a couple of small business incubators in St. Louis. They have over 300 of them, and we're trying to get them to come down here. So the Black Caucus has been more mobile than we have been. In the Missouri Black Caucus, has been more mobile than we have been in the past.
Now, you brought up Mike Brown. What's the situation like in Ferguson? And also, do you see any similarities to any communities in Kansas City? I was on a panel discussion, and one of the people in the audience asked about Ferguson and why do I think that it hadn't happened, anything like that hadn't happened here. And I thought the police chief, the black mayor, but it could happen tomorrow.
Yeah.
I mean, in your opinion, are there any similarities to Ferguson and some of the areas here?
It's similarities, but it's a lot of differences. So I'm going to start with the differences and tie into the similarities, because the similarities, in my opinion, come out of the African American or the so-called African American community. So when we look at St. Louis, we see that St. Louis has a larger population of Africans and so-called African Americans than we do here in Kansas City. We see that St. Louis has more access to Fortune 500 companies than we do here in Kansas City. But we see St. Louis is politically isolated, which is different than it is here in Kansas City. In Kansas City, we're not politically isolated, we're economically isolated, which is extremely disturbing to me, because I see enough so-called minorities up there where they should actually be controlling all of their wards, can be controlling their aldermen, and can be controlling the mayorship, but they don't do that because politically they have been isolated. You come to Kansas City, and we have the economic isolation, but we have political access. Now, the similarities come from identity politics. As black folks, we tend to elect people that are black because they look like us, but doesn't necessarily represent the same culture that I come from, and that's dangerous. In slavery, we had two type of slaves. We had one that was a field and one that was in the house. Two different mentalities, two different cultures, same skin color. So in Kansas City, I feel that we've been economically isolated because certain folks feel comfortable when they're allowed to sit at the table, as opposed to making other people feel uncomfortable so everybody that looks like them can have access. In St. Louis, is the exact opposite. In St. Louis, they have access to economics, so they tend not to pay attention to the politics, because if I can make money, then you're on your own. So it's a heavier crab in the barrel syndrome. Now, as far as police interaction and fallout, yes, I think it can happen anywhere because people are upset. But I think that our anger should be turned into positive venues. And what I mean by that is, one thing to throw a rock at a window and break down the window. It's another thing to burn down the entire house, right? So if you're going to have anger, and the anger is related to the way that you're being treated, then the policies of the police department, the interactions of the police department should be changed. One of the bills that we've been supporting at the Black Caucus is something simple. If you get pulled over, then the police will be required to give you a check sheet. The reason that they stop you, if you walk, and the reason that they stop you if they did an outside search or whatever. Now, this will go into giving accurate identification when people are stopped and people are harassed. Well, we can't get this passed because the Republicans say that we're attacking police officers. But the more people that go through incidents like this to speak out, it's easier for us to alter the conversation.
Right. Okay, I want to take a caller. Caller, are you still on the air? Caller, are you still on? Okay. Caller left. So I want to get back to what you were just saying. With the Black Caucus, with the differences, you mentioned there are black people put in position here, but they may not necessarily represent the ideals or have the same mind frame of the field, or the majority, the masses, I would say. And you're saying that it's like that in Kansas City?
Yes, definitely. When I ran for chair of the caucus, I had people from Kansas City calling people in St. Louis saying we can't elect him because he's too ghetto. Well, I'm far from ghetto. I'm hood. And I have no problem where I was raised at. And I'm aggressive. And I have no problem being aggressive. And I study. But this is the mentality. When I got elected, I've never had a white politician come to me and say, Ellington, we would pay to get your gold tooth taken out. I've never had a white politician come to me and say, Ellington, you have to cover up your tattoos. I've never had a white politician come to me and say, Ellington, you can't hang in the hood where you grew up at. I've never had a white politician come to me and say, Ellington, you can't speak out aggressively on race issues. I've never had that come from a white politician. What I've had come from white politicians at times is, hey, Ellington, we're not, calm down. Because they want to have the conversation, but I'm extremely honest. So when we talk about the culturalistic differences, it's real. And when we talk about culturalistic identification, that's real. And when we talk about lack of solidarity and lack of unity, it's hard to have solidarity and unity when you have no common denominator. So when you go through the African American community and you ask 20 African Americans or 20 black folks what do they consider themselves, you're going to get about 10 or 15 different answers. Well, I'm black, I'm Nubian, I'm African, I'm American, etc. Right? When you ask different ethnic groups, you're going to get a common denominator. Well, I'm American with European lineage, or I'm American with Polish lineage, etc. Now, a lot of this comes from lack of understanding of one's roots, but even that is an excuse to an extent when all information is available. It just depends on how aggressive and how hungry you are to actually study.
Okay, I think our caller is back on the air. Caller, are you there? Are you there? Okay. Lost him again.
We're going to get him.
That's all right. We have a few more minutes left. We're speaking with Missouri Representative Brandon Ellington. Now, the black leadership in Kansas City, how do you think that's going? I mean, what kind of leadership do we need here?
I think we need organic leadership. And what I mean by organic leadership, if you see somebody that's speaking to you in a language that's foreign to you and that's not fighting for issues that are germane or that is endear to you, something that you internalize, then that's somebody that you should not put your faith into. When I look at black suffrage from the Second Reconstruction and I look at the current situation that we're in now, I blame a lot of folks that look like me, not isolating or not degrading racism and institutional barriers. But if you smack me, I have two choices. I can keep standing here letting you smack me, saying eventually it's going to be cool, or I can fight back. And I see very little fighting back with fear of retaliation.
Okay, well, that's just about all the time we had. Time went pretty quick. We're going to have you on the show again. Thanks for listening. And I also want to thank my sponsors, MHG. If you have any health insurance questions, please give them a call. They're located on the corner of 18th and Vine. Tune in next week to The Real Deal with Emil.
Nothing like the ruling time to build our team so we can tell Dr. King we fulfilled your dreams.
You know what I'm saying?
Trace back because the facts are indisputable. I'm black and spectacular. The facts are indisputable. Indisputable. Black.
The Real Deal with Emil, brought to you by MHG, your local year-round trusted insurance partner. Let MHG help you for free.